The winter wind swept across the quiet streets of Bozeman, Montana, turning every breath into mist. Snowflakes drifted down like falling ashes, covering the frozen ground where the world seemed to hold its breath. From the doorway of a small diner, Ethan Briggs, a former soldier with tired eyes and a scar tracing his jawline, stepped into the storm. The night was silent, until a sound cut through it. A faint, broken bark. Not loud, not defiant, just pleading. He followed it down a narrow alley where a man's shadow loomed over a trembling German shepherd, a rope raised high in his hand. The dog's body was gaunt, ribs pressing against its skin, its fur matted with dirt and blood. But when Ethan met its gaze, those amber eyes burning through the dark, his heart stopped. He knew those eyes. "Ranger," he whispered, his voice shaking in disbelief. And in that single moment beneath the falling snow, the past he buried came crashing back to life. "Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below." The wind clawed through the frozen streets of Bozeman, Montana, tearing loose flakes of snow from the rooftops and scattering them like shattered glass. Night had swallowed the town, and the air smelled of cold iron and wood smoke. Inside Marlowe's diner, a single light flickered against the window where Ethan Briggs sat alone, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone lukewarm. Ethan was 41, broad-shouldered, with dark hair now streaked by years of dust and duty. His face carried the hard geography of war, lines etched deep at the corners of his eyes, a faint scar near his jaw where shrapnel once grazed him. There was something guarded in his manner, a stillness that came from seeing too much and feeling too little afterward. 2 tours in Afghanistan had left him with medals no one asked about and nightmares that never fully faded. In Bozeman, he was just the quiet man who fixed fences and shoveled snow for neighbors he barely spoke to. That night, as the snow thickened into a curtain, Ethan should have gone home, but something in the silence outside pulled at him, an instinct sharpened by years of listening for danger in the dark. Then he heard it, a sound muffled by distance, but sharp enough to slice through the wind. A dog's bark, weak, hoarse, more plea than warning. He rose, dropped a few bills on the counter, and stepped into the storm. The street lamps cast dim halos through the snow, painting the world in shades of gray and gold. The sound came again, from an alley between an old hardware store and a boarded-up laundromat. Ethan moved toward it, boots crunching over ice. What he saw stopped him cold. A man, heavy-set and unshaven, his red flannel shirt soaked with sleet, was striking a German shepherd with a length of rope. Each blow landed with a sickening thud. The dog didn't fight back. It only cowered, its ribs showing through a matted coat of gray and tan, its breath visible in harsh, shallow bursts. "You stupid mutt," the man roared, his words slurred by alcohol. Ethan's vision tunneled. For a moment it wasn't Bozeman. It was Kandahar, the dust, the explosions, the sound of wounded men and loyal dogs who never ran. His fists clenched before his mind could intervene. He stormed forward and shoved the man aside. "Enough!" he barked. The drunk stumbled back, startled by the force in Ethan's voice. "Mind your damn business," he spat. But when he met Ethan's eyes, cold, unblinking, trained, the man hesitated, muttered something about crazy vets, and staggered away into the snow. Ethan dropped to one knee beside the dog. "Hey there, easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The animal trembled violently, its ears pinned back. Up close, Ethan saw the crusted blood on its flank and a deep scar cutting along its left side, an unmistakable, jagged line he had once traced with his own hand years ago. His heart lurched. "Ranger?" he whispered, his voice cracking through the cold. The dog lifted its head. Those amber eyes, clouded by exhaustion yet burning with recognition, locked onto his. The world shrank to the space between them. Memories crashed in, desert heat, gunfire, the smell of gun oil and dust. Ranger had saved his life during the ambush outside Spin Boldak, dragging him through fire when everything else was falling apart. Ethan had been told Ranger didn't survive. He reached out slowly. "It's me, buddy. It's Ethan." The shepherd let out a low, broken whine. Then, with trembling effort, the dog pressed his muzzle into Ethan's palm. His tail twitched once in the snow. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "What the hell did they do to you?" A woman's voice broke through the storm. "Hey, everything all right?" Ethan turned. Standing at the mouth of the alley was Sarah Whitmore, the diner's waitress, a woman in her mid-30s, tall and slender, wrapped in a red coat that flared against the white snow. Her face was pale, but kind, framed by strands of auburn hair that had escaped her wool cap. She'd served him coffee for months without much conversation, though she'd once told him she worked 2 jobs to care for her sick mother. Now, her wide blue eyes flicked from him to the wounded dog. Ethan nodded, voice low. "He's hurt. Bad." Sarah stepped closer, cautious but unafraid. "There's a vet a few blocks over. Dr. Miles. I can call him." Ethan shook his head. "He won't survive the wait in this cold." He stripped off his coat and wrapped it around Ranger's body. The dog didn't resist, only leaned into the warmth, breathing shallowly. Ethan lifted him carefully, cradling the limp weight against his chest. For the first time in years, something stirred in him, an ache he'd thought buried under fatigue and loss. Sarah followed them to his truck. "You know that dog?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, staring at the creature in his arms. "Yeah," he said finally, voice trembling. "He used to save soldiers. He saved me." As they drove through the swirling snow, Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ranger's head rested on his thigh, eyes half closed. The storm outside howled like something alive, pressing against the glass. Sarah kept glancing between them, sensing the strange gravity of the moment but saying nothing. At last they reached Ethan's cabin on the outskirts of town, a lonely structure half buried under snowdrifts. He carried Ranger inside, set him near the fire, and began wiping away the grime and ice from his fur. When he reached the collar, he froze. Beneath the crust of dirt was a small metal tag stamped with clean, deliberate letters. PDS Logistics Property, 817C DG. Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The letters hit him harder than the cold. He had heard of PDS before, the private defense contractor that took over K-9 units after decommissioning. They were supposed to rehome the dogs, not sell or discard them. "It means," he said quietly, "they left him to die." Ranger stirred weakly, lifting his head as if understanding the anger pulsing in Ethan's chest. For the first time that night, the soldier's eyes glistened. He brushed a hand over the shepherd's scarred muzzle and whispered, "You found your way back to me, didn't you?" Outside, the storm raged harder, burying the world in silence. But somewhere in that quiet, Ethan felt something shift, like a buried truth struggling to surface through the snow. And when he looked again at that cold metal tag gleaming in the firelight, he knew this was no coincidence. Someone had done this deliberately. He didn't yet know who. But by morning, he intended to find out. Snow still whispered against the windows of Ethan's cabin by dawn. The fire had burned down to a dull red glow, filling the room with the faint scent of pine and ash. Ethan sat on the floor beside the hearth, his jacket thrown over Ranger's trembling body. The German shepherd's breathing was uneven, shallow yet persistent, as though his body refused to surrender. In the firelight, the dog's fur, once rich sable and tan, was dulled by grime, his ribs visible, each rise and fall a struggle. Ethan ran a calloused hand through the matted coat, feeling the scars beneath his fingers. "You held on," he whispered. "You always do." Sarah had fallen asleep in a chair near the window, wrapped in a blanket Ethan had given her. Even in sleep, she carried a certain weariness, the kind etched into those who have carried others' burdens too long. Her auburn hair spilled over her shoulder, softening the sharp lines of fatigue on her face. When she stirred awake, dawn light caught the freckles across her pale skin. "How's he doing?" she asked, voice still hoarse from the night. Ethan shrugged. "Alive for now." She rose, stretching stiffly, her breath visible in the cold air. "You should let a vet look at him, Ethan. He needs care beyond what we can give." He shook his head. "I don't trust anyone from town, not until I know what PDS really did to him." Sarah studied him for a moment. "You think they're responsible for this?" "I don't think," Ethan said quietly. "I know." He held up the small metal tag again, turning it in the firelight. These units were supposed to be retired honorably, placed with their handlers. Instead, they got sold off or discarded. Ranger's tag means he was part of a shipment, not a soul. Sarah's brow furrowed. A shipment. Property, Ethan said bitterly. That's what we called equipment overseas. PDS treated dogs like inventory. They trained them to fight, to protect, and when the fighting stopped, he looked down at Ranger, his throat tightening. They threw them away. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the wind moaning through the pines outside. Sarah's gaze softened. You lost people over there, didn't you? Ethan didn't answer at first. His mind flashed back to the convoy ambush outside Spin Boldak, dust, smoke, and the sound of Ranger's barking cutting through chaos. He'd been pinned under debris when Ranger dragged him clear. 3 men hadn't made it. Ranger had, or so he thought. Yeah, Ethan murmured finally. People and dogs both bled the same. By mid-morning, Sarah prepared to leave for her shift. Before stepping out, she rested a hand on Ranger's head. He's lucky you found him. Ethan almost smiled. No, I'm the lucky one. When the door shut behind her, Ethan returned to Ranger's side. He noticed the dog's gaze following every movement, cautious, but trusting, as though some buried memory was flickering back to life. You remember, don't you? Ethan said softly. You always had a better memory than I did. That afternoon, he loaded Ranger gently into his truck and drove into town, stopping at a small clinic tucked behind a post office. The sign read, Dr. Harold Miles, DVM. The veterinarian was an older man in his late 60s, his frame wiry beneath a wool vest, spectacles perched on a long, thin nose. His gray hair was slicked back, and his eyes, sharp and kind in equal measure, betrayed a lifetime of seeing both cruelty and compassion. What have we got here? Miles asked, adjusting his glasses as Ethan carried Ranger in. German Shepherd, former service dog, Ethan replied. Found him in the alley last night, beaten, malnourished. Miles crouched to examine Ranger, moving with the precision of someone who knew that animals didn't just need hands, they needed gentleness. Old soldier, huh? Judging by the teeth and muscle loss, I'd say he's about 9, maybe 10. These scars, combat, no doubt. Whoever handled him knew what they were doing. Whoever hurt him didn't. He gave Ranger a painkiller injection and started cleaning the wounds. He's dehydrated, underfed, but his heart's strong. He's got fight left in him. Ethan exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding. That's all he's ever had. Miles nodded. I've seen dogs like this before. After the war, they're forgotten faster than the men who trained them. He looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. You his handler? Used to be, Ethan said. Thought he was gone. Miles paused, reading the pain behind those words. Well, looks like fate had other plans. He leaned back, scribbling notes on a clipboard. I'll keep him overnight, get him fluids. Come back tomorrow. When Ethan left the clinic, snow had begun falling again, light and steady. He stood beside his truck, staring down Main Street where Christmas lights blinked weakly against the gray sky. People hurried by, bundled and laughing, unaware that one of their own soldiers had just found the last piece of his past lying broken in an alley. He drove home with an ache twisting in his chest. For the first time in years, his cabin felt too quiet. He walked to the mantel where his old service medals gathered dust. One by one, he took them down, running his fingers over the engraved names of missions he wished he could forget. Ranger's tag lay beside them, gleaming faintly in the dim light, a cruel reminder that even heroes could be treated like property. The next morning, Sarah returned, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and a bag of biscuits. She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried worry. You look like you haven't slept. I haven't, Ethan admitted. Not since he came back. Do you really think PDS meant to get rid of him? He looked out the frosted window, where the snow kept falling over his old truck. I think Ranger's just one of many, and I'm going to find out what happened to the rest. Sarah hesitated, unsure whether to argue or admire his resolve. If you go after them, be careful. People who throw away loyalty don't fear much. Ethan turned, his expression a mix of steel and sorrow. Maybe it's time someone made them. That evening, when he returned to Dr. Miles's clinic, the vet met him at the door, his face lined with concern. He's stable, Miles said, but there's something you should see. Inside, Ranger was resting on a blanket, a faint IV line taped to his leg. His eyes fluttered open when Ethan approached. Miles handed him a small envelope, creased and yellowed, found inside the lining of Ranger's old collar. "Thought you'd want this." Ethan unfolded it. Inside was a torn photograph, him and Ranger in uniform, taken years ago in the desert, and behind it, a single sheet of paper stamped with the PDS logo and one phrase: reclassified, non-operational asset, disposed. Ethan's jaw clenched, his pulse roared in his ears. Someone had tried to erase the life of the creature that had saved his. Outside, night had returned, and snow began to fall heavier than before, muting the world into silence. Ethan stood at the clinic door, looking into the storm. "You were never disposable," he whispered. Behind him, Ranger stirred, his tail thumping faintly against the floor, weak but defiant, as if to remind him that the fight wasn't over. And Ethan knew then that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to begin. The snow had not stopped for 2 days. Bozeman was buried under white silence, the kind that muffled everything except the sound of one's own heartbeat. Ethan Briggs stood at the window of his cabin, staring at the forest beyond. The world looked peaceful from a distance, but inside him, something had started to move again, slowly, like ice cracking over a frozen river. Ranger lay near the fire, his breathing steadier now, his fur cleaned and brushed back into the proud sheen it once had years ago. The scars were still there, one near his flank, another on his muzzle, but they no longer looked like marks of pain. They looked like proof of survival. When Ethan knelt beside him, the German shepherd lifted his head, eyes following his every motion. "You still watch everything," Ethan murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You never stopped being a soldier." There was a knock at the door. Ethan tensed automatically, a reflex that years of peace had never erased. When he opened it, Sarah Whitmore stood there, bundled in her red coat, cheeks flushed from the cold. Snowflakes clung to her auburn hair, and she held a folded newspaper against her chest. "You made the front page," she said, stepping inside before he could reply. Ethan frowned. "What?" She spread the paper across his kitchen table. The headline read, "Veteran Rescues Beaten Dog in Snowstorm, a Town's Silent Hero." Underneath was a blurry photograph of him carrying Ranger through the storm. Sarah bit her lip. "Someone at the diner must have taken the picture that night. They're calling you the Bozeman Guardian." Ethan's expression darkened. "I didn't want this." "I know," she said softly, "but maybe it's not such a bad thing. People are asking questions about the dog, about where he came from." That caught his attention. "Anyone from PDS?" "Not yet," Sarah replied. "But a woman called the diner this morning asking about you. She said her name was Claire Donovan, said she's a reporter from the Sentinel." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I know that name." Claire Donovan had once been an embedded journalist in Afghanistan, covering the K-9 divisions. She'd seen war not from the comfort of a studio, but from the dirt and dust beside soldiers and dogs alike. He remembered her as sharp, relentless, and fearless, someone who believed that truth was worth bleeding for. A knock sounded again, harder this time. Sarah's eyes widened. "You expecting anyone?" Ethan shook his head. He opened the door, and there she was, Claire Donovan, older now but unmistakable. She was in her late 30s, with short dark hair tucked under a gray beanie, her posture straight despite the cold. Her eyes, steel gray, alert and unflinching, scanned the room in one quick motion. "You haven't changed much," she said, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "Still like your solitude." "Claire," Ethan greeted warily, "you found me fast." "I had help," she replied, brushing snow from her coat. "Your face is all over town. You're not easy to miss." Sarah introduced herself quietly, then excused herself to give them space. As the door closed, Claire took a seat near the fire, pulling out a small recorder. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Depends on who you're asking for." She met his gaze squarely. "For the dogs, Ethan. For what happened to them after PDS took over." He said nothing for a long while. Then he placed the metal tag on the table. The letters caught the firelight again. PDS Logistics Property, 817C DG. Claire's eyes narrowed. "You found this on him?" Ethan nodded. "Inside his collar, along with this." He handed her the crumpled document, reclassified, non-operational asset, disposed. Claire read it, and her jaw tightened. "I've seen this kind of reclassification before," she murmured. "It's corporate code for destroyed or sold. There's a trail, Ethan, and it leads straight to people who've made millions off what they call surplus war assets." Ethan leaned forward. "You're saying they've been selling retired K-9s? Selling, euthanizing, experimenting on some," she said quietly. "I've been chasing this story for years but never had proof until now. Ranger might be the key." Ranger, lying near the fire, stirred at the sound of their voices, ears twitching. His gaze shifted between them, alert but calm, as if he somehow understood his own story was being told. Claire glanced at him, her expression softening. "He remembers you," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. He never forgot. For a while they sat in silence, the wind hissing outside. Then Claire opened her laptop. "If you're willing, I need you to tell me everything, how you found him, what PDS told you when you tried to adopt him after discharge, everything." Ethan began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing clarity. The emails unanswered, the paperwork lost, the way he'd been told Ranger was transferred overseas. Claire typed fast, her eyes flicking up occasionally to gauge the emotion behind his words. When he finished, she closed the laptop slowly. "This story won't just expose them, Ethan. It'll burn them to the ground." But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. "If they did this to Ranger, there are others out there, aren't there? Dogs like him." Claire nodded grimly. "More than you want to know." A long silence hung between them. Then Claire said, "I need physical proof, a record, a name, something internal from PDS. You still have friends from your unit, right? Anyone who worked logistics?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Maybe one. A guy named Mark Holloway. Used to run supply chains for the company after he left the service. Last I heard, he moved to Billings." "Can you reach him?" "Maybe," Ethan said, "but he's not the trusting kind anymore. The war changed him." Claire zipped her jacket, determination flashing in her eyes. "Then let's go find him." Before Ethan could respond, Ranger stood abruptly, head turning toward the door. His body stiffened, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Claire froze. "What is it?" Ethan reached for the revolver he kept by the mantel, moving quietly to the window. Through the falling snow, he saw a black SUV parked on the roadside. A vehicle too clean, too new for this part of town. Two figures sat inside, silhouettes barely visible through tinted glass. "They've found us," Ethan muttered. Claire's voice dropped. "PDS?" He didn't answer. Outside, the SUV's engine idled for a few seconds, then headlights flared, slicing through the snow before the vehicle rolled away into the white darkness. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension rippling through his shoulders. Claire looked at him. "They're watching, Ethan. That means your story is real." He turned back toward the fire, where Ranger was still standing alert, eyes fixed on the door. "It also means," he said quietly, "they're scared." The cabin creaked under the weight of snow as the night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a lonely, echoing sound swallowed by the storm. Ethan stared into the flames, the reflection of fire flickering in his eyes. "If they think I'll let this go," he said under his breath, "they don't know who they're dealing with." Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of something breaking loose in the forest. The storm was no longer just weather. It had become a warning. And this time, Ethan wasn't the one being hunted. The morning came gray and heavy, with a sky that looked like it could collapse under its own weight. Snow still clung to the branches outside Ethan's cabin, muting the world in white silence. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and unease. Claire sat at the small kitchen table, her laptop open, fingers tapping steadily while Ethan loaded his rifle with calm precision. Ranger paced near the door, ears twitching, nose lifted toward the faint scent of something, or someone, he didn't trust. Claire looked up. "You think they'll come back?" Ethan slid the magazine into place, eyes steady. "If they followed us once, they'll do it again, but they won't find us waiting." The plan was simple. Reach Billings, find Mark Holloway, and uncover what PDS was hiding. Simple, but not easy. The storm had worsened overnight, and the roads were barely visible beneath layers of ice. Still, Ethan felt that pull in his gut. the instinct that had carried him through every battle. This time, though, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for truth. Claire zipped up her parka, her breath fogging in the cold air. "You're sure Mark will talk?" Ethan hesitated. He's paranoid, the kind of man who triple locks his doors and burns his mail, but he hates PDS. They used him and tossed him out. If anyone knows their secrets, it's him. By mid-morning, they were on the highway, the truck crawling through a white wilderness. Ranger sat in the back seat, head resting on Ethan's shoulder, his golden eyes reflecting the endless expanse of snow. The world outside was desolate, trees bent low under the weight of ice, the wind whispering across empty fields. For long stretches they drove in silence. Then Claire spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You ever wonder why you keep coming back to these fights, Ethan?" He glanced at her. "Because someone has to." She studied him for a moment. "Or maybe because you don't know how to stop." He didn't answer. Outside, the snow thickened again, blurring the road until it felt like they were driving through a dream. By the time they reached the outskirts of Billings, dusk had fallen. The town glowed faintly beneath the haze of storm clouds, streetlights flickering like distant stars. Ethan parked near an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the industrial district. "Mark's place is close," he said, checking his pistol. "He used to live above the old feed mill." They trudged through knee-deep snow until they reached a metal stairwell coated with ice. Ethan knocked on the rusted door twice, then paused. From inside came the sound of movement, a cautious shuffle, then a click as a latch drew back. The man who opened the door was gaunt and wiry, his beard patchy and streaked with gray. Mark Holloway, once a supply sergeant, now looked like someone who had lived too long in the shadows. His eyes darted from Ethan to Claire to the dog, sharp with suspicion. "Briggs," he rasped. "Hell, I thought you were dead." "Almost," Ethan said. "Can we come in?" Mark stepped aside grudgingly. The apartment smelled of coffee grounds and gun oil. Papers were pinned to the walls, shipping manifests, printouts, maps with red circles drawn in thick marker. Claire scanned them quickly, realizing this was the work of a man obsessed. "You've been tracking PDS," she said. Mark gave a short, humorless laugh. "Tracking, yeah, you could say that. Watching them turn heroes into ghosts. You're not the first to come knocking, but you might be the last." He shuffled toward a cluttered desk and pulled out a metal folder. "These are internal shipment logs from 3 years ago. PDS didn't retire those dogs. They sold them to foreign contractors. Some went to labs, others just disappeared." He slammed the folder down. "Disappeared, Ethan? Like they never existed." Claire's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Dozens of pages, each stamped with confidential, listed serial codes and destinations. One code caught Ethan's eye. 817CDG, Rangers. His chest tightened. So he was meant to die. Mark's eyes softened briefly. "Yeah, but fate had other plans." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You didn't hear this from me, but there's a name on top of it all. Rebecca Sloan. She runs the logistics department now. If you want to burn PDS, she's the one holding the match." Before Ethan could respond, Ranger stiffened and gave a low growl. The lights flickered. Then the distant crunch of tires echoed outside. Mark moved fast, pulling down the blinds. "They found me," he hissed. "Who?" Claire demanded. "PDS security. They've been watching since I leaked the first file." Ethan peeked through the blinds. A pair of black SUVs parked near the alley, doors opening, silhouettes stepping out, moving through the snow. He turned to Mark. "Is there another exit?" "Back stairwell leads to the canal," Mark said, grabbing his jacket. Claire stuffed the folder into her backpack as Ethan motioned Ranger toward the door. The shepherd pressed close, muscles taut, ready. Outside, footsteps crunched closer, voices muffled by the storm. They slipped through the back stairwell, cold air slicing into their lungs. As they reached the bottom, a voice shouted, "Stop!" A shot rang out, echoing off the brick walls. Claire ducked. Ethan spun, firing back once into the air, just enough to cover their retreat. They sprinted toward the canal, snow blinding them. Ranger stayed close to Ethan's side, his breath forming white clouds in the dark. Behind them, headlights cut through the storm like blades. Mark gasped, "They won't stop." "They don't have to," Ethan said grimly. "We just have to be faster." When they reached the edge of the frozen canal, Ranger suddenly broke ahead, barking fiercely. A A flash of light behind them. Another gunshot. Ethan turned just in time to see Mark stumble, clutching his shoulder, blood blooming through his coat. "Go!" Mark shouted. "Don't let them bury it again!" Ethan grabbed Claire's arm and pulled her toward the far embankment as Ranger circled back, snarling at the approaching figures. The shepherd lunged once, scattering them long enough for Ethan and Claire to drag Mark to cover. They didn't stop until they reached the truck. Ranger leaped into the back seat, muzzle dusted with snow. Claire pressed her scarf against Mark's wound. "He's losing blood." Ethan floored the gas, tires spinning on ice. The SUVs faded into the white distance. Snow swallowed everything, sound, light, even the fear. For a long time, none of them spoke. Then Mark groaned, voice barely audible. You have what you need." Claire squeezed his hand. "We'll expose them, I promise." Mark managed a faint smile. "Then make it count." His eyes fluttered shut. As the truck sped through the storm, Ethan's knuckles whitened on the wheel. Ranger rested his head on his arm, a silent reminder that the line between man and animal, soldier and victim, had blurred long ago. And somewhere behind them, the lights of the SUVs disappeared into the snow like ghosts retreating into the cold. The storm broke with the morning. Over Billings, the snow had settled into a soft white stillness, the kind that made even broken things look clean again. Ethan's truck rolled to a stop outside a small mountain clinic, its tires half buried in drifts. Inside the cab, Mark Holloway lay pale and unconscious, his arm bandaged tight with Claire's scarf. Ranger's head rested on Mark's knee, eyes wide and unblinking, guarding him as if duty still ran in his blood. Claire jumped out first, waving frantically to a nurse. Moments later, Mark was carried inside, leaving streaks of red against the snow. Ethan stood for a moment, the cold burning through his coat, his breath rising in white clouds. For the first time since the war, he wasn't sure what to do next. Claire came back out, her face drawn but resolute. "He's stable," she said. "The doctors will take care of him." She hesitated, then pulled the metal folder from her bag, the one that Mark had nearly died for. "Ethan, this is it. Everything. The proof we need." He stared at the folder for a long moment. "What happens when you publish it?" Claire's expression hardened. "The truth will finally have teeth. They won't hide behind patriotic slogans anymore." She paused, her breath trembling slightly. "But it's going to paint a target on us." Ethan gave a faint, tired smile. "Hasn't stopped us yet." They drove back to Bozeman that night. The road was silent, the snow glittering beneath the moonlight. Ranger leaned between the seats, his muzzle resting on Ethan's arm, the faint rumble of his breathing steady and sure. Claire watched them both, a quiet ache in her chest. "You ever think," she said softly, "maybe the world doesn't deserve loyalty like his?" Ethan glanced down at Ranger. Then maybe loyalty's meant to remind the world what it lost. 2 weeks later, the article went live. The Forgotten Soldiers, Inside PDS's Secret Trade in War Dogs. It hit the national news by morning. Images of emaciated K-9s filled television screens, alongside testimony from handlers who'd been silenced for years. The public outcry was instant, fierce, unstoppable. Protests erupted, donations flooded into shelters, and Congress demanded hearings. Rebecca Sloan, the woman behind the program, was arrested under federal charges. For the first time in a long time, justice didn't feel like a rumor. When the storm of cameras and headlines faded, Ethan found himself back where it all began, his cabin on the edge of the woods, smoke curling from the chimney. Ranger was outside, older now but proud, bounding clumsily through the snow like a dog rediscovering joy. His paws left deep prints leading toward the trees. Ethan watched from the porch, coffee steaming in his hand. He could still hear the faint echoes of gunfire in his mind, still feel the weight of guilt he'd carried for every friend who hadn't made it home. But something had changed. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Claire visited one last time before leaving for Washington to testify. She stood beside him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her gray eyes soft. "They passed it," she said quietly. "The K-9 Valor Act. No more classified retirements. Every service dog gets a handler, a home, a name that can't be erased." Ethan nodded slowly, unable to speak. Ranger trotted up the porch steps and sat beside him, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's leg. Snow dusted his muzzle like white ash, but his eyes still gleamed gold. Claire smiled. "He's yours again." Ethan looked at her, then down at the dog who had saved him twice, once from a battlefield and once from himself. "No," he said softly. "I'm his." The wind shifted, scattering light flakes across the yard. Far off, the sun broke through the clouds, gilding the snow with a soft golden light. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked toward the horizon, as if listening to something only he could hear. Ethan followed his gaze. "Come on, partner," he murmured. "Let's go home." And as they walked into the fading winter, man and dog side by side, the storm finally lifted, not just from the sky, but from his heart. Sometimes miracles don't come with trumpets or angels. Sometimes they walk toward us on 4 tired legs through the storm, carrying the proof that love still remembers. Ethan thought he had lost everything, his purpose, his faith, his reason to believe in goodness. But God often hides his answers in the quiet places, a loyal friend returning from the cold, a stranger who chooses compassion, a single act of courage that ripples across the world. And maybe that's what faith truly is. Not waiting for light from the sky, but choosing to keep walking when the road disappears beneath the snow. Because somewhere ahead, grace is waiting. Tonight, if you believe that loyalty is sacred, that love can outlast war, that no creature of God should be forgotten, then share this story. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you believe miracles still happen, even in the smallest acts of kindness, hit subscribe and stand with us. May God bless every soldier, every rescuer, every heart that still chooses love over fear. And may He bless you wherever you are tonight, under the same sky, beneath the same falling snow.